Hey, my friends, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and we are picking up exactly where we left off, for me, 5 seconds ago, on this 2-day conversation you and I are having about what the significance of the phrase weeping and gnashing of teeth is in the Bible. And that's what we were digging into in the last episode when we had to hit pause. So here's some music, and then we're right back in where we left off. And now I feel like we are right back to where we have been so many times, you and I, which is in this place of marveling at the idea of a God. Not like Thor or somebody who is an exaggerated version of people, but like the deity who is held out as having made all things, of being the most powerful being. No being can even be conceived of that would be more powerful, because this being, the one held out by the Bible and by reason, is defined by their lack of limits, not their limits. So this being can't not do anything. This being has access to everything, transcends everything, all of the natural boundaries and things that contain the options that are extended to you and I. Those boundaries don't apply to this God. Whatever this God does, whatever this deity does, is right. This deity's judgments cannot be wrong by definition. So on the one hand, as we're learning about Jesus here together in the Gospel of Matthew, we're talking about a deity who put forth tremendous effort to be familiar to us, to present himself in a way that we would be like, oh, yeah, you look like a person. I get that. I can track with that. I understand the words that are coming out of your mouth. But at the same time, we're talking about a triune deity who exists in two forms that are beyond our comprehension, who exists in three parts in one without any limits or boundaries, that is completely other for us. So on the one hand, very close, very accessible, very familiar. On the other hand, completely other. But even if we're talking about God incarnate in Jesus as held out by the Bible, we're still talking about an entity here that is otherworldly, beyond otherworldly, othernaturally. And if we don't bear that in mind, the whole conversation about the judgment of God gets very weird. If we imagine God is an exaggerated, better version of you or me, his judgment still seems screwed up and dangerous. You get a version of God that's like Dr. Manhattan from The Watchmen, who's detached and indifferent toward people and bored of the whole thing and can't be troubled. And when he is troubled, it's out of annoyance and you better look out. Or you get a Homelander-like character from The Boys who is so narcissistic and selfish and evil and seething that you just hope he never comes your way and never looks your way, because when the judgment comes, it will not be based in any kind of morality or reason. It will be based in the narcissism and failings of that exaggerated human evil superhero character. No. We're not talking about that, though. We're not talking about you or me. If we got assigned to the throne of judgment, we'd screw it all up. We don't know. We don't know what people did. We don't know what people were really thinking. We don't know what the right terms of judgment are. We're talking about a deity who knows everything, is limited by nothing, and is the only entity ever qualified to truly judge, which is why Jesus said the stuff he did in Matthew chapter 7 in the Sermon on the Mount about judging and not judging. So if I'm somebody who's religious or not religious, but I'd like to understand the book of Matthew, I'd like to process that through with somebody else who would like to understand the book of Matthew, and I'm listening through this podcast, if I am that person, I am agitated and uncomfortable every time the notion of God's judgment or justice or the reckoning that we're talking about here comes up, because I'm going to picture religious fundamentalists being given the power to wield the sword, and I know deep down they're going to get it wrong, and I don't really want to be on their team. Well, join the club, my friend. I don't want to be on that team either. I don't want the sword. I don't trust myself. And respectfully, as much as I might like you if we hung out in person, I don't trust you for that job either. I think you'll screw it up. I think you would judge me improperly, and I do not want to trust the fate of my eternal soul to your evaluation of the situation. Nor do I want to trust it to some media mogul's evaluation, or politician's evaluation, or person on the street's evaluation, or even my own evaluation. The only chance you've got of the judgment being correct and the mercy being correct is to have that be deferred to a deity that transcends the boundaries that limit you and I. With that in mind, I actually find these kind of passages about judgment to be less mortifying than I did when I used to picture God as an exaggerated version of ourselves. because definitionally, with the added power needed to judge properly, also comes unlimitedness of character, unlimited goodness. This being must have the integrity and loyalty to intrinsic attachment to truth and reality that is sufficient to properly judge. So, on the one hand, when we see the phrase gnashing of teeth, it is always in the context of human regret, remorse, or forget this, I'm not going to be regretful or remorseful at all. I'm just going to stay mad, and I'm mad at you, whoever is responsible for the judgment. I'm mad that you even exist. You see it in that context, in anger, rebellion, violence, lashing out, a pent-up desire to do evil to others, but you never see it presented in the Old Testament or by Jesus in the New Testament as a mark of somebody who's really getting things right and really is enjoying that peace that passes all understanding and who is right where you want to be. Maybe the expression doesn't resonate with us today. I still haven't Googled what it actually means. I'm going to pull that up here in just a second. But this is one of those places where even though we didn't live in the first century and we might not recognize that turn of the phrase beyond a few passages in the Bible, there's enough context that we just did to know what kind of situation it is, and to know that the Bible and Jesus conceives of this gnashing of teeth and weeping as being a thing that happens on the outside of the kingdom, and that being on the outside of this truest, realist thing, when everything is called to account, being tossed in the basket of bad fish, being harvested by the angels and bundled up to be consumed by fire, it all sounds pretty freaky, but it should, because it's the exact opposite of what you want, of what you were built for, what you were designed for. So which would be the nicer thing for God to do? To forfeit his godness? To forfeit who he is and what he's about and his transcendence? To be like, oh, everything is right? Or to judge? We recoil at the idea of judgment, but we also recoil at the idea of somebody like Hitler never having to answer for those 6 million Jews and never having to answer for what he did in prosecuting the war the way he prosecuted the war. As much as we find the idea of God's judgment for us scary, freaky, upsetting, troubling, maybe even unacceptable, I could never follow a God who, we also find the idea repulsive that there might be no settling of accounts for someone who deals in sex trafficking or the worst crimes of the person who victimized you in the worst way. We have this built-in sense that we want justice and that the universe requires justice, that God must require justice, that somehow this is self-evident by merit of what we understand about ourselves and about existence and about the basics of right and wrong. It's freaky when we get close to that flame. Well, again, I think the way the text is flowing, I think the way these kingdom parables are flowing, they're designed to remind us that it should be freaky to imagine us getting close to that flame. And the out that Jesus goes on to provide to those who realize that they do not want to get close to that flame of the judgment of God is not better behavior. Better behavior isn't going to get it done. All human behavior is insufficient before a perfect God who transcends everything. Instead, it's leaning into the grace and mercy and forgiveness of the King who adopts us into his kingdom as sons and daughters and heirs and children by his own work at his own expense. We get the riches of God's mercy and grace at the expense of Christ. That is the equation that I think is setting up here, and that equation doesn't make any sense if we duck it every time we run into stuff about weeping and gnashing of teeth because it makes us uncomfortable. All right, you've been very patient with me, and now I am going to Google gnashing teeth. All right, meaning. There we go. Thank you, autocomplete Google. All right. Dictionary definition: to grind one's teeth together. Oh, the example sentence says he gnashed his teeth in his sleep. Okay. Second definition: to show one is angry, upset, etc. His opponents have been gnashing their teeth in or with frustration since he won the election. They do a good job over there at Merriam-Webster of keeping their example sentences up to date. That worked pretty dang well. Okay, so I guess that's it. I guess that's the definition of gnashing of teeth, which means, hey, high five, good for us. We were able to look at the context and piece that stuff together for ourselves. Looks like we got pretty close as to what that means now, and I guess how that meaning would have been received in the first place. But the bigger point is that this is a phrase, weeping and gnashing of teeth, that forces us once again to consider the infinite power, authority, and judgment of God, and to be forced by the text once again to recognize that we cannot have a God who is powerful enough to do the beautiful, redemptive kingdom things that are so attractive about all of this without also having a God who is powerful enough to do something about evil, which is the thing that detracts from the kingdom things. You have to have a God who is able to dispose with the negative things that detract in order to have a God who is powerful enough to make the beautiful things, the kingdom stuff, a reality. This is logic, this is common sense, but when you mingle our own shortcomings with it, passages like this are going to be trouble. We're going to get hung up on them a little bit. We're going to have to think a little bit harder to reorient ourselves to the nature of the deity that the text is holding out in order to think through what we make of it and how we understand the Bible. Thanks for gaming this out with me for the last couple of days, and thanks again to all of those of you who over the last 48 hours or so have responded to my messages. It's really nice to hear back from all of the patrons who have done that, and I'm just about done with the process of trying to reach out to each of the patrons who support the program at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast personally to say thanks. I'm saying it again here. I appreciate all of you who make this thing go by supporting the program, and I appreciate all of those of you who don't support the program, which is absolutely fine as well, and are here and are part of this conversation. Thanks so much, everybody. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.